Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Rong, an actor you might have seen recently as Sergeant Melissa Jordan in Pretty Hard Cases, or as Alex Mollari Jr.'s once and future soulmate Avery in Hello Again. Both of those shows are on CBC Gem. And Rong is at the helm of the USS Enterprise as Lieutenant Jenna Mitchell in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which premiered last week on Bell Sci-Fi Channel and Crave in Canada and Paramount Plus in the US. And that gave me a good hook to schedule this episode. Rong picked Kill Bill Volume 1, the first half of Quentin Tarantino's spectacular mashup of 70s grindhouse action and kung fu cinema. It's the movie that introduced the world to Uma Thurman as the Bride, an assassin bent on delivering bloody retribution to the former associates who betrayed her and left her for dead, and to Vernita Green and O-Ren Ishii, played respectively by Vivica A. Fox and Lucy Liu. You've seen Kill Bill, right? You know. It's a fever dream of action cinema, with fights choreographed by the legendary Yun Woo Ping and executed in high style by cinematographer Robert Richardson and editor Sally Menke. Almost 20 years later, it's still all killer, no filler. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Kill Bill Volume 1, I think, is what I would consider like a pretty formative film in my life. I think it was the first film that I've ever watched that made me feel inspired. You know, because I was 13 when the film came out. And, you know, up until then, you know, like when I was 13, I was like, you know, that was when I started acting. Like I joined my middle school's drama club. So I started getting like the acting bug, and I was getting more and more serious with it. But, you know, I hadn't considered myself like an artist or an actor in any sense of the way. And watching Kill Bill was the first time like I felt like the world opened up to me in terms of what cinema could be and what really great acting looks like, or like the kind of acting that really excites me. And it was the first time that like a film that made me fall in love with film.
Okay. And, you know, and Tarantino would be, I mean, I know for a lot of people who are around that age when he was coming up, like even if they were 18 when they saw Pulp Fiction or generation after generation of people are sparking to his stuff the same way I did when I guess I would have been 24 and saw Reservoir Dogs and just thought, oh, this is a perfect movie and it's made for me. And all movies should be like this. And then it's because I was kind of vaguely aware of the references. I mean, I was lucky enough that I had seen City on Fire, so I could plug that in. And I had seen The Killer and all the stuff that he was influenced by as well, because we're not that far apart in age, him and me. But what he does, this cultural garburator thing he does, where he just absorbs an entire genre and then reflects it back at people, and it feels fresh and new again. The thing about Kill Bill that I love so much is that it's his last movie where he's not even pretending that realism matters.
Yeah.
Right? Like it is so uniquely its own thing. It's a cartoon about martial arts movies and blaxploitation films and Westerns and the two films together. I mean, it's just, it folds in all of these pieces while also building on the Fox Force 5 monologue that Uma Thurman has about the career she had in Pulp Fiction. And it's exhilarating. And honestly, I think it's his artistic peak, the two Kill Bills.
Yeah, like I would totally agree with you. Like after I watched Kill Bill, I was like, I need to watch more of this director. That was like the first time I was ever interested in a film director, you know, like before it's like, whatever, I watch movies, they're entertaining, they're fun. But watching Kill Bill, the first Kill Bill, like opening, and then I followed, like traced back to his work, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and kind of saw the building blocks of what culminated in Kill Bill. And even his films after, I think they all hold their own merits and like and have like their own peaks. But for me, Kill Bill is just like this wild dream of like a cinephile's like treasure box. Like it's so full of incredible bits, and it's a perfect way to do an homage. I think that's also kind of what's so exciting about it too. That's how you do an homage. That's how you culturally appropriate. Like, I don't know, it's not cultural appropriation. It's what feels to me like a really good example of cultural appreciation, of telling stories of a culture that you don't belong to and doing it really well.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I think of it as somebody showing you all the things he loves about the movies he loves.
Yeah.
In the same way of, I love this scene from Black Lizard, and I love this scene from, every Shaolin Temple movie with the student and the master and all of these things. And then, of course, he's casting people like Sonny Chiba and Gordon Liu because, of course, he can. He's Quentin Tarantino at the height of his powers. He's got Disney money behind him because they've bought Miramax, and the Weinsteins are just funneling all their support to him because, of course, he's their golden boy. And in a weird way, I had this whole other thesis about how Harvey Weinstein's insistence on isolating and protecting his best filmmakers, also his most valuable filmmakers as assets, seems to have kind of held them back. I think I talked about it in an episode with John Ross Bowie. Well, if all you're hearing is that you're a genius and every decision you make is brilliant, you're never going to evolve past a certain point. And so you look at people like Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez and Lasse Hallström, who got sort of sucked into the prestige pipeline at Miramax around the same time. And they just sort of leveled off and kept doing the same thing. And with Tarantino, he switches genres and varies things up. So it doesn't, it's not immediately detectable, but he's like, the reason I think Kill Bill is so good is because it doesn't have to be about anything other than what it is. And because Thurman is so great at carrying the emotional through line of like, it's a simple revenge story. She doesn't have to do anything other than look angry, but she does. She brings so much more into it.
Yeah. I mean, she brings so much like vulnerability into it and like sensitivity into it and like fierceness. And I would say that's like, for like a lot of the cast, I mean, like, yeah, like I've rewatched Kill Bill this morning because I had to get up early. I was just like, well, it's 7:30 in the morning. I might as well watch Kill Bill. It's a great way to start, but it just reminded me of all the reasons I fell in love. Like that opening scene where she gets into that knife fight with Vernita Green, and the moment where, it's just, she pulls up in the pussy wagon and it's like a villain walks into like the set of a Disney movie. And then, they get into that fight and then you just see the school bus pull up and you see her daughter walk in and just these two women at a standstill. And without any dialogue, they're communicating so much vulnerability and desperation and negotiating.
Yeah, it's the sense of mutual respect between enemies, right? That you never see. And it's, of course, we find out it's because they've known each other for years and years.
Yeah.
But it's all there. It's all on the screen.
Yeah.
And and then the more time we spend, the more layers we unpack in the bride's story we get, which gets us to Oren, which again is a character who could have been, especially with Lucy Liu, at her most self-aware and charismatic. That could have been a one-note joke, but we understand everything about her by the time they square off, because we've already spent that time. We've had the flashback, we've had the quick, the origin story, if you will.
Yeah.
But Lucy Liu is just not, there's no condescension. There's no sense that this is a genre. Like none of the actors is in a pastiche. They're not, their characters are living these lives. And I think that's the gift of Tarantino as well, that comes through in Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, is we're seeing heightened genre stories presented as though they were, ordinary everyday worlds where it's about what these guys do when they're not shooting each other.
Yeah. And I agree. Like I love and idolize Lucy Liu, and seeing her as Oren Ishii in that film, I felt like I found my superhero, and it's because she's fierce and but she also had that same caliber in her performance of showing us who this character is, beneath the facade of just being, could be very one-note dragon lady type of role, right?
Exactly,
and she absolutely didn't do that. And another thing, what I loved about that movie was just that animation flashback to tell Oren's story. I'm a huge anime fan, and so to see an anime sequence in a Hollywood movie, it just blew my mind. And it was done so well. Like that piece was produced by Production IG, which is one of the best animation houses in Japan. And, also just for him to, as a director, to bring in other collaborators and other directors who really knew what they were doing and to have their work showcased together. I think that was, just really great.
Yeah. Well, I just want to roll back a little bit. You said you were 13 when you saw this, so I'm assuming you saw it on video as opposed to
yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about it. I was just like, I wouldn't have been old enough to get into the theater, and I think it was a movie that my dad might have downloaded for me. And I remember I have a memory of watching it at home in our family's living room while my parents were like on the side, and I remember like watching some of the violent sequences, being a little bit like, am I allowed to see this? Like, so I think that's I think my. Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, my dad, I think he downloaded the movie for me illegally.
I think the statute of limitations is up, and also at this point, Harvey Weinstein can, suck it.
He can suck it.
Yeah. But but it's perfect for that age too, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's weirdly enough, it's a movie about embracing. It's a movie about unlikely people embracing authority and power and agency. Mm-hmm. They're not good people, mm-hmm. but there are no good people in the movie, so that's fine. Like there's the honor among thieves things has been thrown away because the bride's been betrayed. The whole plot is about her revenge, so we can get on board with her. I mean, it's the same way he seduces us in Reservoir Dogs and mm-hmm. Pulp Fiction. Jackie Brown less so, because Jackie Brown does have upstanding characters, and it's the anomaly, mm-hmm. it's the outlier. Mm-hmm. But Tarantino works best, I think, in stories where we get to figure out who the best bad people are. And the bride is easily his most justified hero. Although, you can kind of, rewatching it this time, I just remembered, didn't remember it being quite so rapey. Like the whole rape revenge aspect of it is really unpleasant. It has to be, right? Because it's a heightened world. Yeah. But it's one of those things where I don't think you could or should kind of, it's weird, right? Like his artistry justifies it in the moment, but it's pretty intense.
Yeah. I mean, I remember coming to like the rapey parts, but it's also, and of course, like now we're living in a post-Me Too world. Mm-hmm. Our sensitivity, our knowledge, our understanding of these things are so much greater than what it was back in, 2003. But I will say, like, it's cringy, but it's also immediately and almost very quickly satisfied. It's also just as satisfying, right? She wakes up from her coma and immediately she kills 2 rapists. Yeah. Like, that's awesome. Yeah. Don't let him get away with it. Get your revenge. Same thing with Oren's character, that line of like, lucky for her, like the Yakuza boss was a pedophile. And she used that to get her revenge. I was like, it's like super cringy, but she got her revenge. And it's like these morally gray characters that kind of are able to have agency and are able to satisfy their goals. And
they assert a morality for themselves that doesn't exist in the world. So you can't argue against it, right? I mean, that is the problem with genre fiction in general. The stuff that Tarantino is mining and plumbing is that the things he's inspired by are far, far worse. He actually finds mm-hmm. an emotional underpinning to make it all make sense. Mm-hmm. But it is like, I thought this time that it felt, it's not that I'm suddenly trying to soften the film, because that would be ridiculous. The mm-hmm. brutality of Kill Bill, the violence, never mind the sexuality, but the violence is fun. Like you're encouraged to enjoy slashing and brutality and the artistry of it. Yeah. Like the way the blood splatters out, it's absolutely absurd, like no one gets their head chopped off and it's just like a funnel, like not a funnel, like a fountain. A fountain, a spout. Yeah. And you're encouraged to aestheticize it too. Like part of the fun of it is watching A-level Hollywood talent apply themselves to B movies, right? To the pulp stuff. The fight with the Crazy 88s is, I mean, I remember I saw that theatrically. I think I saw it twice with an audience. Mm-hmm. And each time the room goes quiet and then people start to realize that they can enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because when it shifts to black and white, there's that
Yeah.
tension. And then you start realizing, oh no, it's just so it looks cool. And the room will just start to go, ooh, and just enjoy it. And it was so much fun with a crowd.
And it's fun. It's easier to have fun with, like, I mean, I typically, as an audience member, like, I don't love like gory violence things, you know, like usually sometimes like if it like, you know, like one of the most cringy movies I watched was like 24 Hours, where like, you know, he had like when he tried to like cut off his hand from the rocks. I was just like, I can't watch that. I can't watch that stuff. But when it's super stylized like Kill Bill, yeah, there's an element of fun into it because you know it's not real. You know it's choreography. You know it's props. And actually very interesting. Like when I was younger and that Crazy 88 scene switched to black and white, like I didn't know why that artistic choice was made. I thought it was censorship.
Uh-huh.
Like I thought it was like, oh, they must have turned it to black and white because it would have been too gory and audiences wouldn't like that. So in my mind, I'm always like, there has to be a version out there that's in full color, that's uncensored.
Yeah, you want to see what they kept from you. That's the beauty of this sort of movie, is that it's transgressive and trashy in just the right way to pull you in even further. I think that is probably true that I know it was shot in color and changed to black and white in post-production, probably to keep the R rating. But I think also if it had been the intention to release it in color, it would have happened by now, just because Miramax never missed a trick. Like they released the full version of Grindhouse a couple of years after the theatrical cuts came out, and they would have found a way to milk a couple of extra bucks out of it. That was just their deal.
Yeah.
But it's better in black and white. Like it just
feels,
it feels right. It feels more like the early Japanese gangster films that I saw at Cinematheque, you know, in the 90s when they had the revivals and found these treasures that no one had seen on a movie screen in, you know, outside of the Chinatown theaters that screened them without subtitles. And so if you go, you're lost.
Yeah.
As I was as a young guy anyway, trying to see stuff. And it has, as you say, it's nostalgic, but it's also fresh and new because it's being presented through a lens that you just haven't encountered before. And of course, that lens is a gibbering white fanboy, but he respects the material in a way that a lot of other ones don't.
Yeah, and he doesn't try to. It doesn't feel like he asserts his ego too much into it. You know what I mean? Like I really feel like the creatives that he brought on to collaborate, like, really got to put their stamp on the work. You know, like he just, you know, with the just even the animated part, right? He could very well have, you know, used animators from Disney to try and animate that sequence, but it's like, no, he went there because, you know, he understood that anime is a very distinct style of it's a very distinct style that exists kind of only in Japan. Like there's a sensitivity to it. There's a sensibility to the design, the movements, the content that, you know, we just don't have here.
Yeah, and and by hiring, you know, Yun Woo Ping for the choreography, this Hong Kong master who, you know, obviously The Matrix had raised his profile, but he was revered as a god by people who grew up watching his movies, like Tarantino, and that also keeps the film honest in its, like, it. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm dismissing it, but Tarantino resists the opportunity, because it would have been easier to have one person or one guy or just like do one thing, but he refuses to collapse Japanese cinema, Hong Kong cinema. There's he keeps those spaces separate, right? There's anime for Oren because she's Japanese, and then there's Gordon Liu coming from Hong Kong cinema. He gets Hong Kong people to work on that, and the textures. I mean, most of that doesn't pay off until the second movie, but the textures of each storyline in each nation, to the point where the black and white Western stuff in part 2 feels like it was shot in Spain, or Italy, even though it wasn't. It's just, it looks like those movies. It references the Westerns that he loved, the spaghetti Westerns, the cheap ones, and the Django movies, which he loved them so much that he named a character Django who had no reason to be called Django, just so he could have Franco Nero show up for one scene in Django Unchained. Which is, you know, that's when his tendencies are starting to get in the way of the stories he's telling. But with Kill Bill, it's not tied to anything. Like there's no real world anything. You're dealing with a California landscape filled with thugs, punks, and assassins. You're dealing with a Japan that is so dominated by the Yakuza that there's no world beyond it. You're dealing with a China where there are Shaolin temples just waiting for people to show up and be trained.
Yeah, just waiting for white girls to come and learn Kung Fu.
In a really strange way, it's kind of welcoming because it does point out that the bride is so good at everything she does that she is like she applies herself to become the best, and there's a work ethic, even to bringing your body back after 5 years in a coma.
Yeah,
but it never really shows us who she was before she was an assassin, which I think is really smart. Certainly not in part one. Part one, she's a complete enigma who has no past except that she was a parent. She was a mother and lost her child, thinks she lost her child, which gives us the single greatest ending of any Tarantino movie. I love that, the chill that goes through the room.
Yeah.
When Bill asks,
does she know her daughter's still alive? Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. We haven't even seen Carradine's face yet.
Yeah. And that was so great. Like this unnamed protagonist and an unseen villain. It really keeps you, it really draws you in with the mystery of it all.
I'm the thought experiment of would this have worked as a 3-hour one sitting movie is fascinating because I don't know that it would have had the same punch.
No, I think it was really smart to have divided them in two because the volume one moves at such a fast pace and there's so much different colors and cultures, and it really just, you're really thrown in. And then I find volume two takes like a slower pace. We kind of go back a little. We have like these like slower scenes where she's, at a campfire with Bill, and the whole like the sections of her trying to getting to Bud feels like very quiet and drawn out, and like a quiet, more of a, and so I feel like as an audience member, if I was just going through all the adrenaline scenes of volume one, and then suddenly, get pushed into like a slow pace of volume two, I think I would get pretty angsty.
Yeah.
I would be like, this is not a good movie. Just turning kind of,
Yeah. Why isn't my heart still going? Why am I not on the edge of my seat anymore? But separating them is great because it gives you the contemplation in the space, at least in the first time around when you actually had to wait. I think it was 5 months between the two films.
Yeah.
Expectations could not have been higher.
Yeah.
And it pays off. It just pays off in a more philosophical, simple way. And we don't really have to get into volume two here just because I don't think we necessarily have time, but also the hook of volume one getting its own episode is so cool. Yeah. But the way it goes out in two it's very, very satisfying. And I really like it a lot, but volume one is the first line of cocaine, right? Like you're just jumped into it and moving at such a clip that, you want all movies to be like this. Like it's that thing where you're just watching it. I can only imagine what it would have been like to be the first experience of Tarantino that you had, because it is like the purest stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I was also like really surprised. I remember at the time of how inspired I felt by the movie as like a young woman. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like it was the first time I've ever seen female characters portrayed like that on screen, where they're morally gray. I think, for me, the bride, we're seeing a lot more female anti-heroes nowadays on like television and stuff. But for a long time, the bride was like the only example of a female anti-hero. And I love the anti-hero. It's my favorite trope. But for a while, like for so long, I'm like, there's no other ones,
Hey, it's Norm. I'm interrupting this episode to let you know that the internet won. I'm finally starting that newsletter I've been talking about. It's called Shiny Things, and it'll be a weekly dispatch about physical media, culture, and maybe even the odd streaming show. Basically whatever I want to write about. I can do that now. You can take a look at shiny.things.ghost.io, or you can find an easy-to-click link at the Semcast Twitter account. If you like this podcast, I think it'll be right up your alley. Come visit.
It feels like a love letter to film And I know the film also had a lot of criticism for, like Tarantino hates women. But I was like, no, I watched this film and I felt like a love for women and a love for like kind of, just the limitless possibility of the power that women can have, like it sounds really absurd, but like I guess not, but it's just, it doesn't get any more powerful than a woman seeking revenge and taking lives. Like, that's pretty badass.
It's the sword, right? Like, it's the intimacy of the sword and the intimacy of beating Vernita half to death with her fists too. Like, it's not just people on opposite sides of the room unloading weapons at each other. These are really personal, because of course it is. She has a kill list. It's a revenge story, but these are deeply personal, very upsettingly intimate fights.
Yeah. And like, even at the end of the scene with Vernita and her daughter is revealed to have witnessed it, even for her to just, very calmly be like,
yeah, come find me if you still feel raw about it. Isn't that how she puts it?
And it's kind of like, there's like this strange sense of honor attached to it. That's, in a way that makes you suddenly think this character's honorable after she just killed this girl's mom. Yeah.
I mean, she has a code. Everybody has a code in these movies because that's just how they work. But because she's been betrayed, her code stays intact, and that makes her admirable and honorable, but also furious. Like, just the way that Thurman marches through the movie and just sort of stalks everybody, without bothering. There are no disguises. There's no subterfuge. She just shows up and starts mowing people down. And there's something incredibly satisfying about watching Uma Thurman do that, particularly because this is someone who spent years being the girl for other people, right? Like, just being. I remember the first time I interviewed her, the only time I've interviewed actually, was for Jennifer 8. Which was in 1992, I want to say, and it was probably her first studio picture after things like Dangerous Liaisons. It was a thriller with from Bruce Robinson, who made With Noel and I and How to Get Ahead in Advertising, and he pitched this thriller and they let him make it. And she plays a blind girl in danger. That's all she gets to be.
Yeah.
I interviewed her in a junket situation, so there are 5 or 6 other reporters in the room with her, and they're just like, tell us about the nude scene. She's like, it was a body double. Can we talk about the physical work? And like, she just wanted to talk about all the prep she'd done and all the work she'd done, and playing against Andy Garcia, who's like 10 years older. And it was so clear that that's the only way the industry was willing to engage with her was, you're a hot girl.
Yeah.
Do hot girl things, talk about sexy things.
Yeah. And
then to watch her just sort of refuse to be that and claim, like, even the way Terry Gilliam used her in Baron Munchausen, she's introduced as Venus, and she's really only used for her beauty when she's so clearly able to do more. And then to see Tarantino use her in Pulp Fiction the way he did, and just frame a whole segment of his movie about how cool she is and how smart she is and how on top of everything she is, and then derail that with the heroine and how she has to be revived, all of it, like, never losing the sight of just how interesting Uma Thurman is when you put a camera on her.
Yeah.
And then to give her a sword, it's just, of course she has to be this person. But I don't see it as misogynistic. I mean, the bride goes through some awful stuff.
Yeah.
But weirdly, it's all personal stuff, as opposed to random, the way that if it was one of the movies that Tarantino is riffing on, she would be the girlfriend who gets killed in order to make the hero sad, so he goes off and fights. Yeah,
well, that's exactly it. Yeah.
And she just refuses to die. And she is her own hero. And it just becomes something so much greater in the telling.
Yeah. And, it's, but, and it's still like weighted with like, like the heart, right? You're like, she's still like walking through this movie with like the fierceness of motherhood.
Yeah.
Because she's fighting for, this daughter that she thought she lost. And so, it's a film that, like, she's a killer, and it's very easy to just like make her a killer, but it's like, no, but she's also a mom. Like there's no one definition of what this woman needs to be in this movie. You know, she doesn't need to be Bill's love interest. She doesn't need to be the bride or the mom or the assassin. Like she's all of it. And it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
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 It's just so full.
It's a remarkable performance too. Like it's not only is it a good role, but she just gets everything out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
To the point where, unfortunately, like she almost died doing it. She you know, the story about the car crash, right? This came out a couple of years ago.
I just read about that. Yeah. Like it's like a cut scene, where she like rammed into a tree or something.
Yeah. She lost control of the car. Tarantino and his, I don't know if his team assured her, but Tarantino assured her that it was safe and he needed her in the car to be seen driving it. And it was just a driving shot, and it was not safe. And she, I'm trying to remember exactly what the details were, but I think, yeah, her legs were trapped under the front of the car, and she was very badly injured. She's apparently fine now, but yeah, it was awful. And they just didn't say it. No one talked about it for years until the Me Too movement brought up a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah.
And she got to speak out on that level about according to, well, I've got Wikipedia here in front of me, and I'm hoping it's true, but Miramax finally released the footage in 2018 after Thurman went to police following the accusations of sexual abuse by Harvey Weinstein. So again, one more thing that that Weinstein's sort of indulgence probably enabled. But
yeah, I mean, that's so crazy that was even like a car crash is like swept under the rug, because, you know, it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, you don't want to kill the golden goose.
No. Ugh.
And it's, yeah, I have never spent more than an hour in a film set, right? So I cannot say that I believe any film is worth endangering yourself for or risking death for. But it's one of those things where I know the scene isn't in the film, so I can force myself not to think about it while I'm watching it, right? Because it's not like Twilight Zone, the movie, where three people were killed and it completely affects the sequence that was like the absence of that sequence completely affects the piece of the movie that depended on it. But it is like an asterisk that doesn't go away.
Yeah, I mean, like, the health and safety of actors is, you know, I mean, as an actor myself, I'm like, I wouldn't risk my life doing something that's unsafe, because it is like, you know, at the end of the day, like, our bodies are our instruments. And if you take that away from us, it really impedes on our ability to work, or at least work in the same capacity. And I would be angry. Like, I think I've done like a show once where I brought my own costume piece and it ripped, and I was so upset. Like, imagine if I actually lost a finger or got a scrape, you know?
Yeah. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have Tom Cruise, who's actively trying to kill himself in Mission Impossible movie after Mission Impossible movie.
Yeah. Or like Jackie Chan, where Jackie Chan can't get insured. He's broken every bone in his body.
He can't move his face anymore. It's like, that's not good.
No. I think that's sometimes, you know, where I think Hollywood kind of, you know, sometimes glamorizes the extreme lengths that actors would go for the movie or for their roles, you know, like, you know, applauding actors for physically changing their bodies for roles, you know, whole aura around method acting. I think it's fucking bullshit. Like, it's so dumb. Like, putting on weight, gaining weight, like, yeah, sure, that's an incredible transformation, but or like staying in character even when you're offset. Like, I'm sorry, but like, to me, that's not craft. The craft of acting is being able to do your job, your performance, when the cameras are rolling, when you step onto stage. It is not a performance art that you carry into your daily lives that you use to impede other people, or become a nuisance. Like, that's not acting. That's like some kind of psychosis. Like, that's like there's a pet peeve of mine, because I think it really creates this misconception of what acting is. And, you know, I was very fortunate that I found acting early, and I got into I kind of follow like a more institutional route in terms of getting training and having that kind of access to learning about the craft, but and understanding what it is. And where sometimes I find troubling is for people who may have not had the ability to follow their passion early or to pursue these kind of training opportunities. See a lot in like the BIPOC community that's a story you commonly hear, but then so that their only access is through the media and I feel like sometimes people can be fed the wrong idea of what acting is.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And it makes me sad, right? It makes people think, because especially too, like acting is not like, we don't have an instrument, like you don't see there's no paintbrush. It's hard to see what the work is behind it. And all of these like sensationalism around method acting and about how this actor, stayed in character the whole time. And I'm like, that's not what acting is. Like, that's not, and furthermore, that's just not sustainable.
Yeah. I keep falling back on what Robert Pattinson said a couple of years ago, or maybe even more recently than that. He was just quoted as saying, like, you only ever hear about it when people are being assholes, when they're playing terrible people, and how important it is to be terrible all the time. And that's just not necessary.
Yeah.
And it
gets glorified in a way, right? Like, I'm not shitting on method acting entirely. I think there are aspects of it that work, but I think Hollywood has like this twisted version of it that is like, you're a nuisance, or you're a crazy person, or you're, doing unthinkable things. And that's not it, right? Like,
acting is, inherently collaborative, right? Like, you have to be working with the people opposite you.
Yeah, it's a conversation.
To pushing them away. Sally Field is method, but I didn't even know. I interviewed her once and it came up and she just mentioned it. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. And she said, I know, I don't talk about it because I don't want people to think badly of me.
Yeah.
And the real method, the immersion method, and using elements of yourself as a character, that's a valid technique. But yeah. And on the other hand, there's, Jared Leto doing whatever he thinks that was.
Yeah. And unfortunately that gets, lumped in with what we generally think of what method acting is.
Sorry, I'm not trying to.
I feel like I was just crapping on method actors.
Yeah,
I don't mean to do that, but it's the like that Hollywood, that kind of like weird media perception of what it is, which is it's stunts.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not. I feel like we've gone down this road, even though, as far as I know, nobody in Kill Bill is method. None of those actors is method, and it wouldn't help the movie if they were. No. Right? Like, I don't see how. Yeah, certainly for an action film, you don't need it because you're dealing with a heightened reality anyway, and in sort of a keyed up version of emotion. But it's a style, like action acting, and this sort of acting isn't often appreciated either in the same way. Like, it's just as respectable and maybe even more essential to selling the reality of the story. But what Tarantino does with actors is kind of miraculous that way, because he can find, in something as quiet as Jackie Brown, he can find those little moments of dignity and compassion between Forster and Pam Grier, Robert Forster and Pam Grier, where he can find whatever, like, he can find a way to balance whatever De Niro and Samuel Jackson are doing, where they're completely incompatible.
Yeah.
Jackson is so big and De Niro is so small, but they occupy the same space somehow and they breathe the same air. And in Kill Bill, everybody is going to 11 all the time, and it's fun instead of off-putting. At no point do you ever feel like it's too much, because the whole point of it is to be too much.
Yeah. And I think it's he plays with that tension really well of keeping things grounded and yet extraordinary. And they kind of mirror back at each other, and you kind of I kind of fall into this curated world that's really indulgent and fun, and fantastical,
Yeah. And still
Yeah.
like deeply human, like
And deeply human. Yeah.
assassins have daughters, and
Yeah.
sorry, Yakuza crime lords have concerns about their heritage and being
Yeah.
disrespected. Like it's
Yeah.
it's weirdly relatable, despite the fact that you can't relate to anything anyone is doing. You can relate to what they're feeling.
Yes. Yeah. That's a really great way of putting it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, is there, other than the origin story of inspiring you to think about cinema in a different way completely, is there anything of Kill Bill that you've taken onto your own palette? Is there stuff that you've used in your own work, or borrowed or referenced or outright stolen?
I'm trying to think. I think the word that comes to mind is permission.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, what I took from that film is just a permission to break all the rules, and eventually, as I got older, I learned that you have to know the rules first before you can break them to do it well.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But it was I think that was just, that just opened the door for me. It was just like, you can break the rules, and you can like forge your own way, like
tell whatever story you want to tell.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think of like in terms of, have I ever borrowed anything from Kill Bill in my own work? No, I can't think I have. There was actually when I was in fourth year of the acting conservatory at York. I remember we were starting to do on camera stuff, and I attempted to do Lucy Liu's speech in that movie as like a monologue, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an exercise. And that was the first time I realized how difficult it was to have done what she did. Truly, it was always something that was like a piece that I've admired for so long, and I still do. I think it's such a fine piece of acting, the way she balances the anger, the fierceness, and also just like this and warmth, like oddly enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember trying that monologue on and just feeling like a complete fraud. I was like, I can't. And it really taught me that I had so much to learn in terms of finding that balance, and it's not just and I think what's also very compelling about Tarantino's work for actors specifically is he writes incredible dialogue, but it's always like there's an incredible amount of subtext behind it, and that's really hard to tap into without having done the work that's required.
His monologues are always like, they're almost always diversionary technique, right? Mm-hmm. The characters are saying it to buy time for something
else. Yeah.
And it's up to us to figure it out. And it's up to the actor to suggest whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And other than, Bill's monologue at the end of Volume 2, which was lifted from some other screenwriter somewhere, some other comic. It's like the Clark Kent to Superman's joke to the world. That's a pre-existing thing that Tarantino heard somewhere and decided he could use. And it's the only one where Bill doesn't have any other strategy. He's just spouting off because that's who he is. Yeah. But at the end of a 4-hour journey, it's great because we are less interested in hearing where he's going than for the bride to just fucking kill him already. Come on. Yeah. Why are you letting him waste your time?
Yeah.
And in that case, it's the bride who's playing him by letting him talk. Mm-hmm. And it's this great final flourish of the story, because after all of the individual justifications and all of the other monologuing arguments that we've experienced with all the other people on the list, here we are with a guy who's just talking, and it's meaningless.
Yeah, it's absolutely meaningless.
Because the bride is finally getting what she wants.
Yeah, and yet that's the only thing that comes to his mind right now, which is also kind of, has its own kind of sadness or like a humanity to it, right? In a way, he just wants to spend his last moments telling this anecdote about Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
just to buy himself a little more time.
Yeah.
It is kind of tragic.
Yeah.
But by that point, we're so on side with the bride that it's okay. You can kill him. It's fine.
You can kill him. Yeah. And it happens so fast and so quietly too, right? Like it's not a big sword fight. It's a very quick like thing with the fist, you know?
5-finger death punch.
5-finger death punch. Yeah.
Again, it's just, and she can just deliver stuff like that. The dialogue as well as the physical side of it, just to make it snap and make us feel, oh yeah. So now again, I am afraid I have to watch all 4 hours of it again, because
yeah.
That's the beauty of this. That's why I love it so much. Just talking about it makes you re-experience all of it. And then you want to feel the feeling. You're chasing the next hit.
Yeah. And every time I watch it, because I've been watching it for, almost 20 years now.
Just about, yeah.
And every time, because I'm going through different stages of my life. And, as I grow older, like I'm catching on to like references I never got before, moments that I'd never struck me a different way. So it's one of my favorite films because for that very reason, that it's one that you can kind of keep going back to and still discover new things because there's just so much.
Yeah. Well, and have you chased down the source material? Have you, found the Lady Snowblood films or followed up on some of the things that he was referencing?
Oh, no, but I think one of the ones that I did was that I did track down was Rashomon.
Mm-hmm.
No, am I saying it right? No,
Rashomon, yeah, the Kurosawa film.
Yeah, which I know it's not directly connected to Kill Bill, but it was. I do remember like reading about his inspirations, and that was one of them. And yeah, kind of seeing, it was actually my first time seeing like a classical Japanese film.
Oh yeah.
And to see Japanese cinema, and I can definitely see like echoes of that in the work. Yeah, I had never watched old Japanese cinema before. Like I've seen older like Chinese cinema, but yeah, that was my first introduction. Yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty of these movies. You can just come away with a dozen things that you can follow up on and other stuff to build on, but they exist on their own if you want them to. Like he is good enough at pastiche that he can create something that stands alone.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm just going to go watch it again. It's fine.
Yeah.
My thanks to Rong Fu, who you can watch right now in Hello Again and Pretty Hard Cases on CBC Gem, and in Star Trek Strange New Worlds on Bell Sci-Fi and Crave in Canada and Paramount Plus in the US. Thanks also to Winnie Wong. She knows what she did. You can find Rong on Twitter at WrongIdeas, RONGIDEAS, and you can find Kill Bill Volume 1 on Blu-ray and DVD from Lionsgate in the US and E1 Alliance in Canada. It's also streaming on Prime Video and Crave in Canada and HBO Max in the US, and you can rent it or buy it on most VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the podcast is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 46 of which currently aren't available anywhere else. And check out my brand new weekly newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny.things.ghost.io. I know that's a lot. There's links on the Semcast Twitter page. And that's all the pitching. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next time.